Good afternoon. I'm John Schmidt from SCTV at the Senior Center, and today we're getting together to talk a little bit about the Jefferson Hotel and particularly the murals that were there that were done by Mildred Pelzer in the 1930s. And as guests on this video, I've asked my friends Tom Schulein and Warren Paris to lend some expertise to some of these subjects. In 2018, we did a video about the Pelzer murals, and as it turns out, much of the information was based on them the murals being available for view, and they're in the Iowa City Senior Center and in the Iowa City Public Library. But at this time, that's not the case, so part of what we're doing is an update. Also, we're doing a little bit about Bob Hibbs, who is literally the man who wrote the book about the Pelzer murals. So, I guess to kick it off, I remember the Jefferson Hotel as a hotel from my childhood days, and it was definitely the centerpiece of Iowa City in some ways, much like the old Capitol or any of the stadium or any of the hospital or any of the landmark buildings around town. I remember it was the first place you would go if you wanted to get a taxi. It was a place where people met each other a lot of times for coffee, or just if you were picking somebody up for a ride, they'd say, "Meet me at the Jefferson Hotel." And so I'm going to ask Tom to talk a little bit about the beginnings of the hotel.
Sure. Well, it was built in 1913, dedicated in 1913 after, I think it was about 8 months to build it, 8.5 months or so. There was a group who were exploring the idea of building a hotel somewhere in 1912 in the downtown. And it happened that the site where it ended up had what was called Metropolitan Hall, or the Metropolitan Building, which was built in 1858. It was one of the largest buildings in Iowa City, multi-stories. It was used for touring performances. Mark Twain, for example, lectured there in 1869. And they had shops and other things there too, but there was a very devastating fire in 1912, in October, that destroyed the building. So there was the site for the building. And it was referred to at the time as the finest hotel in Iowa, in that it had so many features such as, well, first of all, it had 6 floors originally. If you know what it looks like today, you notice that it has 8 floors, and you'll see a division where the original building ended there. Each room had hot and cold running water, telephone, steam heat, and electric lights. They had an electric elevator and a 250-foot artesian well. There were merchants who rented space in the building, shoe store, dress shop, drugstore, barber, and a billiard parlor. And Warren perhaps will tell us a little bit about the restaurant that was also there. But in 1928, 2 additional floors were added to the hotel, possibly because there was talk of adding another hotel to downtown Iowa City so that they could compete with that. The other hotel was never built, however. And over the years, many persons of national importance stayed at the Jefferson, such as John Kennedy during his presidential campaign in 1960. And just to bring it a little bit more up to date, in 1967, the University of Iowa Facilities Corporation bought the Jefferson Hotel, and the 2nd through 8th floors were sold to the UI for office space, with the Facilities Corporation retaining ownership of the basement and 1st floor, which has retail rental space, such as Hertine and Stocker. So that's the basic history of the Jefferson.
Thanks, Tom. A little bit about Warren's experience with the hotel that I have heard about it recently is that he, as I was, he was familiar with the operation of the hotel as a hotel, but he also had his place of business, or his occupation, was photographer for the university, and he took up an office space in that eventually. So I had another relationship with the hotel.
One of the things that I recall initially as a student was going into the lobby, and was always enjoyed the environment, and I would meet friends there. And also in the basement that had an outside entrance was called the Huddle, and it had a red door, and I actually in my college English class wrote a short story about the behind the red door. And so that was about once a week I would go there, and I never participated, but up on the second floor was the dining room, and they would have meals there, and as I understand it, that's where some of the artwork was on the walls. I recall the elevator, that they still had an elevator man in the lobby that was adjacent to the check-in desk, and he would take you up to the various floors. Later, when I started in 1969 as a photographer of the university, I was part of the information and news service office, and the news service offices were on the 7th floor. And that same man, even though everything had changed in the lobby and they'd built around him, he was still handling the, as they say, taking guests and passengers up and down. And his name was Fred Friendly, and he always had a little chat that he shared with us when we would go to our offices. In addition, I got a part-time job as a painter, and I painted all 8 floors staircase inside with a special epoxy paint that was very toxic, and at that time we would always, as they say, finish the day feeling very lightheaded from all the fumes. We didn't have all the precautions they do today. There was our main hallway on the 7th floor was offices. There were like 8 writers and then clerical staff. And then I had on the south side of the building a photo lab and a little studio that and my office itself. In addition, during the uprisings, as we called them, with the Vietnam War, I could go out on the staircase or a fire escape on the south side, and I could look down on the intersection of College and Dubuque, where the protesters were huddled down in the middle, and you'd have cars trying to go by, see how close they could come to the protesters. That was what I recall primarily of my time there. I spent 5 years of my working career there before I stopped and started my own studio. One of the additional things that happened there was that we would have conferences, we would have important guests come up for interviews, that the writers would, all 7 colleges were covered. On the 8th floor was the purchasing department, and I frequently would have to go up there to get the purchasing papers done so that I could buy certain supplies and equipment. Let's see. I think that one of the key things that I remember is that the big changeover was when Fred Friendly was shut down, and they put an automatic elevator in on the other side of where the original elevator had been. And so we had just a push card that we could go up and down in the elevator. They modernized it, as it were.
Before, there have been a good number of changes with the Pelzer murals since the time that I made the video with Tim White about the murals as they were on public display in Iowa City. But probably the most dramatic thing that's happened is one of the champion of the Pelzer murals, the man, as I say, who wrote the book, Bob Hibbs, has passed away. And I never got to meet him, but he did assist me in making the video in my research, and actually offered up some of his photographs. And I have his obituary here, and he passed away at May 23rd of 2019 at Mercy Hospital. And I won't go into he was 77 years old. I won't go into his obituary in any depth. I'll just say that he had a varied career and worked for the Iowa City Press-Citizen, and he wrote this book plus 2 other books on Iowa City history. So the approach that I was going to take was just to talk a little about Bob Hibbs and the role of the amateur or somebody who's interested in history of a place where they live as a local historian. And no better example of that is at hand than Tom Schulein, who, as many of you will know, has done many talks on Iowa City history. So I would just ask Tom to reflect on what he remembers about Bob Hibbs and anything he wants to say about the role of the local historian.
I met Bob Hibbs, I believe it was in 2013. I had seen him but not met him before that, and I went over to his house and met him and his wife, who were very cordial. And Bob kind of mentored me as I was beginning my research on Iowa City history. And he came to my first lecture, and then one of the subsequent ones I remember. And Bob I went to some of his lectures as well. I remember his postcards being in the stories of the postcards in the Press-Citizen, and there are subsequent writings of those that you can obtain. It's quite a few. I don't remember, it was 100 or 200 of them. He was quite a collector of that. He had quite a bit of memorabilia of Iowa City history too, in glass cases in his house. It was really cool. So Bob, I didn't know real well, but that is what I remember of him. And his wife, might have been Mildred, I don't remember her name right now.
Margaret.
Margaret, yes. I had the occasion to fix her sewing machine one time. I was doing a little bit of repair work, not for money, but just getting interested in them. And so I met Margaret, and I didn't know Bob very long.
Well, thanks, Tom.
Sure.
Warren, I know you had more of a personal relationship with Bob, and a long-standing relationship. I wondered if you would speak a little bit about him.
Well, Bob and Margaret lived across the hall from us, my wife and I, when we were in Park Lawn Apartments, which is up on the hill next to the Riverside. And what street is it? Park Road. As a reporter, and he was a student at the time, as I was also, and John F. Kennedy's assassination, Margaret did not have a TV, and she was home, and when I came home at lunch, she rushed out, and we spent that time together watching everything unfold on our TV. And so from then on, that was every time we'd run into friends or her children, she would bring that up, and her kids would say, "Yes, Mom, we know you've told us." So that was kind of a humorous thing. I had photographed their kids for senior portraits, and Bob and I always exchanged stories, and he was always looking into details on things of what was going on. And he was a reporter and a journalist, but he had a natural curiosity about what was happening and what was the background that was going on. In addition, in our later years here, I was working with Bob on Oakland Cemetery information, and I was photographing the monuments on each grave site, and he had specified things that of individuals that were important to Iowa City. So I was over to his place several times going over things, and then, as they say, poor health kind of interrupted that progress on that project, and it's an unfinished project at this time.
Thanks, Warren and Tom, for being here to take part in this video. And I will continue with a little bit of explanation of what it requires to see the murals in their current state. We know that of 5 of them that are in existence and are on display. Unfortunately, it's not exactly trivial to go see them. The 2 that are at Longfellow School are in a public place, but you probably need to check ahead of time to go see them. And the other 3 are in the Cedar Rapids Art Museum in storage, but fortunately the storage where they have them, they are up on the wall. So if you gain access to that, you can see them. So thank you again to Tom and Warren, and we'll wrap it up there.
Copies of Bob Hibbs' book about the murals of Mildred Pelzer may be checked out from the Iowa City Public Library. The book is available for purchase at the Johnson County Historical Society at Iowa River Landing in Coralville. Many of Bob's newspaper articles on Iowa City history have been archived at iagenweb.org/Johnson/postcards/Hibbs, along with vintage photos as part of his postcards feature in the Iowa City Press Citizen. 2 murals, Stage Ready and The Railroad Arrives, are viewable at Longfellow Elementary School in Iowa City. It is recommended to call the school prior to visiting, since the murals are hung in a heavily used assembly room area. Their display may be somewhat disappointing because of the plexiglass casing and the inability to get close to the murals. Here is the contact information for Longfellow School. An additional group of Pelzer murals are available at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. Because these works are in the museum storage area, an appointment is necessary. Within the storage area, the murals are in full display. In other words, they are hung on the wall and may be viewed there. 3 of the murals have been professionally cleaned, including the stunning Symphony of Iowa. 1 is in need of restoration. Here is the contact information for the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. Look for Tom Schulein's talks on local history at the center. Many of his past presentations are available on the center's YouTube page. Search Iowa City SCTV.